Sometimes the communities that change us the most are the ones that we never wanted to need. This is Two Peas on a Pod Office Hours, and today we're talking about navigating modern loss. Welcome to Two Peas on a Pod presents Office Hours, our bi-monthly companion show where we continue to explore connection, friendship, and the relationships that shape who we are and who we are becoming. I'm your host, Dr. Miriam Kermeyer, a clinical psychologist, friendship expert, and global speaker on human connection and social support. You know this, Two Peas on a Pod Office Hours is our one-on-one time together. It's a chance for us to unpack what's really going on in our friendships. Yes, the things that we talk about with our closest friends, and also the conversations that we sometimes avoid saying out loud. And in today's conversation, I'm sitting down with Rebecca Soffer to discuss the gravity, complexity, and at times the unexpected moments of levity in grief. Rebecca Soffer is the co-founder of Modern Loss, a platform and community that has transformed how we think about, how we talk about grief. She's the best-selling author of the Modern Loss Handbook and a Peabody Award-winning former producer for the Colbert Report. Rebecca has spent years helping people navigate loss with honesty, with compassion, and with humor. And today, she's joining us to talk about co-navigating grief and loss and what it really means to find connection in the moments when we need it most. I am so glad to have Rebecca join me today for this conversation. So as always, settle in, get comfortable, because we are diving into even more stories, science, and secrets of friendship. I'm Dr. Miriam, and this is Two Peas on a Pod Office Hours. Rebecca Soffer, welcome to Two Peas on a Pod. I have been looking forward to our conversation for some time now, and it might seem perhaps a little strange to some people to look forward to a conversation about grief, but being familiar with the work that you're doing and the incredible person that you are and the energy that you have and how important this topic is to so many of us, people who have experienced grief, who are experiencing grief currently, who will experience grief, which in fact encompasses all of us. I know that this conversation will be meaningful. And I'm just so glad that you're here. Thank you.
I am absolutely thrilled to be here. I love the name of the segment too. So I feel like I'm at the cool kids table for once. Thanks for inviting me.
There are so many things that make you cool, and you are absolutely more than welcome to sit with us anytime.
Amazing. Tell my tween son that.
Well, yes, and please return the favor, and please let my kids know as well.
We will put them all in touch on a text thread.
The lack of a cool factor for parents when it comes to their children's impressions of them is certainly a unifier for a lot of us. Grief is also one of these universal experiences, these unifiers. And there are so many of those universal themes that I'm really looking forward to touching on together. But before we get into that, I thought we could maybe start with a little bit of specificity in hearing personally from you about your experience of grief and what brought you to modern loss and the important work that you do in this space.
I've said this a lot over the years, and shockingly, it still remains true that this is definitely not work that I would have ever chosen to do. There are a lot of people who grow up and they're extraordinarily empathetic and they have this altruistic streak running through them, or they are really interested in psychology and therapy and whatnot, and they want to actively get into tough themes in order to help people through them. That wasn't me. I guess it was in a sense. I always wanted to be a journalist, but I think that if I had been presented with the option of like, do you want to talk about the topic of grief and loss as an adolescent, even in my 20s, I would have said, no, that sounds really depressing and really scary. And like, why would I want to talk about that? But then obviously life kind of deals you a hand and you don't have much control over it. The only way that you can, enact control is how you play it in some ways. And my mom was killed when I was 30 in a car accident. I was a daily TV producer at the time. I was working for Stephen Colbert at the Colbert Report, and I was single. I had a lot of friends. I was moving up in my career. I really felt like I was cooking with gas. Finally, I had gotten my graduate degree from Columbia Journalism School a couple years beforehand, and everything was kind of just moving finally. And then all of a sudden, I was ejected into loss mode, grief mode, and also, take care of yourself mode, figure it out mode, figure out how to ask for support mode, but not look too needy mode. And it was extraordinarily overwhelming, confusing, sad, stressful, infuriating. It was all the adjectives that you might associate with dealing with a profound loss and grieving somebody who played a really important role in your life. And that was my mom, because she was my person. Fast forward to 3 years later, and my dad died from a heart attack. So between the ages of 30 and 33, both of my parents died. Absolutely not my life plan. And yet I still had to pay my rent and get promoted at work and try and date and try and hang out with my friends and try and be in person in the world and not really wall myself off. And that was just so confusing to me. And it was also on top of an existential crisis of realizing that both of my parents had died and there was kind of nothing before me and nothing after at the time because I didn't have kids. And so in sum, I really just got really tired of how I felt that our society talks about things like grief and loss, how they push it into the shadows, how they feel, we really, how we feel like it's something that should be really kind of discussed in hushed tones, or maybe with the one friend who gets it, or your therapist or whatnot, or maybe your rabbi or your pastor or whatever, and not something that you can talk about on a date, or talk about with a friend who maybe could stand to understand more, or talk about it with your manager and not feel like a pariah. And so I just frankly got selfishly really tired of how much energy it was taking me to navigate the world while moving through loss, but also being in build mode. And I just decided eventually to do something about it. And that's where Modern Loss came in, which is something that I launched with my co-founder in the website, Gabby Berkner, in 2013. So I've been doing this for quite some time now. It launched as really a way to fill in the white space that I felt existed around how we talk about grief and loss, which is hopefully in ways that aren't cheesy, aren't too clinical, because you can get that elsewhere, aren't religious, because you can get that elsewhere, and has an enormous dose of warmth and friendship and we get itness and sense of humor and also hopefulness. I'm not talking optimism, because it's okay if you're not optimistic, but hopefulness in terms of showing and not telling people what grief and loss across the long arc can look like, so that you can feel just a little bit less isolated in something that doesn't have to feel isolated at all, just individual.
There is so much in what you just said that I really want to unpack together. And I want to go back to the origins of modern loss. So if I remember correctly, there was this shift at some point that you're describing right now, where it was a little bit of this fed upness. And I think, at least speaking personally, even if you don't believe that there's meaning in everything, I do believe that you can make meaning in everything. And there was this experience that you had where you, I believe, created or participated in this roundtable group, Women with Dead Parents.
Yeah. Yes, that was a thing.
So I'm curious to hear a little bit about the group's origin story, because it's interesting that the origins of modern loss and kind of the evolution of your own experience of loss really involved this small group, small round table that grew in many ways into the large community that you have created today and played such a pivotal role in. So what was that experience about?
Yeah, I think that, modern loss really kind of came out of a combination of experiences. First, just my utter exasperation with how the world likes to talk about grief and loss. I got really tired of how we like to draw lines between ourselves and other people who are going through really hard things. And I'm not even talking about grief and loss as it just relates to death loss. You know, we all
Yes.
know that grief and loss can be from any really hard thing. It can be from a friendship breakup. It can be from a divorce. It can be from a job loss, fertility issues, illness, caregiving. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I always say that if it feels like grief to you, then it is. And it's worthy of examining and respecting and recognizing and nourishing and taking care of yourself. Because if not, then no one else is going to do it for you. And it's really hard to feel like you're healing through something hard unless you feel seen and legitimized in it. And so it really came out of that sense of exasperation from my own experience, and then combined with kind of this realization of what it does feel like when you're able to like let your hair down and let it all out. And that feeling came in the form of this dinner that I went to. I had, in the wake of my mom's death, it was from a car accident. It was extraordinarily traumatic and violent and obviously sudden. And so I was reeling for a very long time. And I had to keep working because I needed to pay my rent. And I was, 30, and I didn't want to kind of grind to a halt in all senses. And so I spent a lot of time outside of work, and I didn't have a lot of time actually, kind of looking for places where I could find community, where I could connect with others over what I was going through. And I remember specifically going to, someone said, well, the JCC in Manhattan, they have this grief group for women whose moms have died. And I showed up to it. I was so excited. It was like circled in my calendar. It was like I was like hanging my sanity on this date that was 2 weeks away. And I finally went in and I looked around and I just felt like so crestfallen because everyone in the room was over 65. And by the way, I understand grief is grief is grief. And you can really create deep ties with a lot of different people and a lot of different perspectives. But sometimes you do need to feel like you're with your contemporaries, whatever those may be, and, not have to explain a lot of things to them. And so I felt extra alone because I was like, well, where are the 30-year-olds? Where are the single 30-year-olds who are losing their minds because they have to work 10-hour days, and are trying to figure out how am I going to do this? Like, what does it look like in a year and 5 years and 10 years? And so eventually I got this invitation from somebody who was an acquaintance of mine. And she's like, look, this may sound a little weird, but I feel like I know 5 or 6 women who have dead parents now. And I know all of you, you don't know each other. Why don't you just come over for dinner one night and let's just see what happens? And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And so I remember going up to her walk up. It was on like 110th and Broadway, and it was in like August. I mean, it was like scorching outside, and it was so hot in the top of her walk up. And we were sitting there, and we were eating this really hot lasagna on paper plates on our laps, and drinking really cheap Trader Joe's wine because we were 30 in Manhattan, and that was fancy to us then. And it was so silent because we had just met each other. It's not like we didn't really know what to say. And I think we got through all of dinner with niceties.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, someone had brought cookies and we're just sitting around and kind of had finally started to relax a little bit. And then someone said something about their dad who died, something kind of weird and quirky and really specific. And I remember that someone else was like, oh my God, yes. And they said something else that was really weirdly specific to them, but was clear that there was a common thread between the experiences. And then I think I just remember the floodgates opening.
Yeah.
And the rest of the night was us just like not being able to shut up and just talking about every different permutation and combination of the shitstorm that we were going through with regard to grief and loss. And we had parents who died in different ways. My co-founder, Gabby, her father and stepmother were murdered. My mom died in a car accident. Another woman, her father died many years beforehand from a long illness. But we kind of realized that there are all these common threads. And it felt so weirdly good to realize that you didn't have to spend all your energy explaining where you were coming from to some people. And I realized that that feeling was energizing because I had more energy then to figure out how to take care of myself. And I was like, oh, this feels really good. It feels really good not to spend 90% of my mental and physical energy pretending I'm okay or trying to figure out what language to speak around my boss or around this person or whatever, and really just kind of let it hang out. And so I was
Yeah.
like, that's the feeling I want to create. That's what I want to create with the community at large. Even if I'm reaching somebody through an internet piece, I want them to feel that through the screen.
There is so much power in communal storytelling and sharing stories back and forth. And as you're talking about right now, the specificity of that and having a shorthand way of telling stories and being able to actually get to the story as opposed to doing all the preamble and trying to kind of massage your way through that opening and explain why you're about to share this story or what it means that you're about to tell a story about a loved one who's passed and that
Yes.
here's what you're looking for. There's so much kind of emotional and cognitive labor that can go into that. So I love that so much of what you're doing right now is helping us to recognize the value in that type of storytelling. You also happen to be an excellent storyteller. And so thinking about this idea of storytelling, and we'll definitely get to the value of that in terms of how we can have conversations, meaningful conversations with others, with our friends, how we can better support the people in our lives. If we look at the stories that we tell ourselves and each other about grief itself, I mean, I love this language of modern loss, right? So if we think about kind of some of the outdated stories and narratives that we have about what loss is like, what that should be like, what we should feel, what are some of those narratives and stories that you have found to be wholly unhelpful? And how should we be thinking about loss in the modern world?
Yeah, I mean, where do I start? And what I want to say that when I realized that I wanted to call it modern loss, I wasn't talking about like, only young people talking about loss. I was talking about like a contemporary attitude toward how we talk about grief and loss. Not like, are you 20? But hey, are you somebody who wants to approach this with no bullshit? Like, do
Mm-hmm.
you just want to like cut through all the filters, like all the Barbara Walters filters that we put on, these like metaphorical lenses when we talk about grief and loss? Would
Yeah.
you like to not speak in platitudes? Would you like to not hear that everything takes a year? Would you like to not use phrases like, always like things like passed on, which some people feel comfortable with, and that's totally fine for them if that's the phrase they want to use. But a lot of people want to speak really plainly when it comes to the hard things that they're going through and that their people have experienced because it just makes them feel better. It makes them feel more seen. And so life is full of humor and hope and gut-wrenching experiences. And like grief is all of those things because you are alive. And so if you're somebody who wants to approach the conversation about loss like that, you belong in a conversation about modern loss. So I just want to be clear that, this really is for anyone who kind of has that attitude.
You don't have to drink the cheap Trader Joe's wine to belong to the modern loss community. Yeah.
No, you can have much better taste in wine and a much better budget.
You can have a glass of water. You are welcome here. Yeah.
Yeah, you are welcome at the table. But I would say that like what are some of the things that I didn't find helpful or sure like some of the myths that the overarching myth that the hardest part is takes a year, We really like saying that. And I think that we like saying that because we like putting timelines on things in our culture. We really like being productive, not just like productive in terms of work, but we like checking things off a list. And also it makes us feel like we're getting somewhere and that when we're going through something hard, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think it's really hard for people to imagine that something like grief and loss doesn't have a timeline, at least not one that is linear. It looks to me more like, I saw Space Mountain once when it broke and the lights went on, and I would not recommend that to anyone because you would never want to ride it again. This happened to me when I was a kid and I was stuck on it. And I think about what Space Mountain looks like with the lights on, every time I think about what the linear progression of grief is, it looks like Space Mountain. It's like twists and turns that don't make any sense. You know, you're going straight for a while and you're like, oh, I've got this. And then all of a sudden you're like flipping upside down and it's pitch black. And that really is what the progression of moving through grief and loss look like. And in my experience, and I think the hope is, of course, that you move through it in a way that allows you to grow a life around that, not like negate it and not get over it, but to grow a life hopefully that is around it and contains it, but also teases meaning out of life and joy and delight along with all the other hard things, right? But I think that we really are tied to this. It takes a year, or there are 5 stages of grief, because it makes us feel more comfortable, like we're going to get somewhere. But the irony is we don't do ourselves any favors when we kind of try and adhere to it, because we realize that that's not the way it is. And then we kick ourselves, or we feel badly, or we make somebody else feel badly, like a friend, like, you know, I wish you were kind of the old you. Or it's been 3 years. I kind of thought you'd be over it by now, or in a better place, you know, and that's just not the way it works. Sometimes the second year is more excruciating than the first year when you're going through something hard, because it's when it feels more permanent, or it feels like you really have to figure out a rhythm of life that, you know, the old way is not going to come back. So I think that's one thing. And I think just another thing are just the platitudes that we share with people that make it feel like we're not being asked to share our own narratives, but rather that we're telling people what those narratives should be, because that's what makes us feel comfortable.
Yes.
And so I think that the most important thing that we do in grief that we fail at is not truly giving an invitation to the person who is going through the hard thing to tell you where they're at, what they need, and also what is not working for them.
What is more modern and cool than an invitation to connect in that moment of grief? And I think that this is exactly the piece that we can all benefit from thinking more about, because you're so right that when we try and step in and support people, so often that is coming from a place of love and care. And it can be such a catalyst for disconnection when the people in our lives don't feel seen or supported. And when we feel then frustrated, we're not showing up in the way that we want to, and that's not having the desired impact on them and making them feel better. But I love this idea of giving an invitation to tell me about your grief. Tell me about what's going on for you. And let's talk about this in a very real way.
And also, I just want to say that a lot of us feel when there's somebody in our lives, and it could just be like a colleague that we even kind of like, and we definitely don't want to see them in pain. I'm not just talking about like when your best friend is going through something hard, but all of us want to feel useful. We all want to feel like we can make a difference, even in this current world. And this is a very crazy thing that I still feel this way. I really do feel like a lot of us truly are well-meaning, and we do want to come through for people we care about. We do want to alleviate their pain. We want to make them feel a little better, make them feel a little lighter. But the irony is that we don't accomplish that when we tell ourselves that our role is to take away their pain. Because that just feels like we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to do that. And guess what? None of us has that magical ability. No one in the world has the ability to remove a sense of grief from somebody else. I mean, I would be like a trillionaire if I had that ability. Our only role is to get to a point where we tell ourselves, I can handle being in a moment with somebody who's going through something really hard, and also not put my stuff on them. I can handle the fact that there is enough room in the world to hold all of our stories, that I will get the chance to share my hard things, but that I'm going to let this person share theirs within the realm of my abilities, because I only have so much bandwidth, as we all do. But I'm going to meet that person where they are at any given time. And I will kind of look for the clues so that I can make that happen. And I'm
Yeah.
also going to remind myself that I don't have to explain it away, that I don't have to assure them that it's going to get better. I don't have to tell them, at least they had a great relationship with their dad who died, or they can always get pregnant again. I don't have to stick my foot in my mouth with platitudes. And also, that doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that we haven't normalized these conversations enough in our culture so that they're secondhand to us.
You said something earlier that I want to come back to because I truly believe that it's helpful both for thinking about the ways that we experience and cope with grief and the ways that we can show up for each other. There so often, and this happens all the time in the context of therapy and in just casual conversations, there's this idea that the goal of navigating grief should be to shrink it, that we should do whatever we can to make that grief smaller, to find a way to tuck it away neatly into our pocket, or that's what we should be doing for each other. Let me help you manage this. Let me share this load with you. Let me help this take up less space in your mind and in your heart and in our conversations. And instead, and you put this so beautifully, and I'm thinking of a particular image that often gets shared. It's not necessarily the case, nor should we expect our grief to shrink, nor do we necessarily want it to, right? Like that grief can be unexpressed love. The goal can often be to grow around it, to expand the other aspects and experiences of our life that help us to cope with that grief and that continue to make life meaningful in other ways. And when we can think about it in that way, that frees up a lot of space for us to be in those surrounding circles for each other. Yeah.
I always like telling people, and again, you're the doctor here, not me. I'm just like a person who's going through it, who's trying to open up a conversation so that other people who are going through it can learn from it, and people who are supporting people going through it can learn from it. But what I realized, like, grief is not a pathology.
Yes.
You don't have to be a medical professional or a therapist to talk to people about grief and loss. It is not a malady. There is nothing wrong with you. Most people on planet Earth are going to move through the experience of grieving something really hard in a really normal way. When I say normal, I'm not saying it's not going to be excruciating. Some days you're going to just be on your bathroom floor and like be like a sniveling heap. I have many days like that in my illustrious grieving past, and sometimes in my not too distant past, because grief and loss are a forever thing, But at the same time, I feel like there is, even though it has been explained and kind of like specified, there's this Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief that everybody knows, right? Which is like the bargaining and depression, everything, and ending and acceptance. And a lot of us still, for some reason, feel like that is what grief looks like, which are the stages, and they're linear. And then you get a gold star. But there's this other model that I really love. I love the description of it, and it's called the dual process model. And it basically kind of explains and then gives permission to and encourages you to live your life in a way that you just described it so well, which is the dual process is kind of like you'll be oscillating between 2 different stages. One is like you're really in it and you're sinking into the hard stuff. You're sinking into the grief mode, the connection, the remembering, the feeling like shit, the feeling angry, all of the ritual, everything. But then you have to sink into the other part of it, which is the living, right? Like the distraction, the humor, the socializing, the party, maybe the, going out and dancing all night long and feeling alive, or just focusing on a work project and feeling accomplished, feeling like you are building that life around this really hard thing that you have to live with. And that is what the dual process model kind of explains, which is you really oscillate between these two. And you don't really choose when it happens. You really naturally find yourself kind of like pulling back. Like you'll know when you're like, oh, I get it. I'm more in like the grieving mode. And then you're like, oh, I'm more in like the external mode or the, productivity mode. And I just love telling people about that theory because I think it just makes so much more sense than the stages theory. This is just more like, hey, it's a never ending back and forth. It's like a bit of a pendulum.
And you said this before when you were talking about that expectation or that belief that we should really give each other a year, right? You have about a year to grieve, and at that point, TikTok. Let's talk about why it's taking up so much more time and space than it quote unquote should, or the 5 stages of grief model. And we can feel so out of control when we are experiencing grief and when there's been loss, and that can be very destabilizing in and of itself. There is the feelings of grief and that loss, and there can be this sense of loss of, oh, I am now suddenly finding myself in a world where I have a newfound appreciation for how uncertain life is and for how unpredictable life can be and how unfair life can be. And I also feel a little bit out of control in my body because I don't know when that pendulum is going to swing back and forth. And it's difficult for me to perhaps find ways to feel a little bit more in control. And so thinking about it from that perspective in terms of the role of uncertainty and control and really agency, I think is part of what we're talking about here. What has been helpful for you in your life and in your work in particular that has given you both the appreciation for and the acceptance, I guess, piece of the loss of control and the uncertainty of it all? And also, what outlets have you found helpful for tapping into that sense of agency and control?
I think something that's really interesting about profound loss is, yes, you feel super destabilized and you don't understand like what not even a year from now looks like, but maybe sometimes 5 p.m. today looks like, because everything has been rejiggered in your life. It could be any real loss. It could be maybe your marriage broke up or romantic relationship. Maybe you had a huge breakup with your best friend, and then all of your dynamics don't make sense anymore in your social circle. Or yeah, maybe your husband died or you lost a child, God forbid, which is its own excruciating, like class in and of itself type of grief. And so I feel like this sense of like loss of control is very, very destabilizing to people. And then a lot of the times I think it helps to remind ourselves that we actually never really had that much control to begin with. It was almost like this illusion of control in life. Like, what are we really controlling? Like, I have no control over anything. I think I have control. I think a lot of us think that we are on this like guaranteed, timeline that contains maybe 80 years or more of life. And hopefully, then eventually we die in bed asleep one night peacefully, but anything could happen. And so I think that what has helped me is yanking myself out of moments where I feel like I'm spiraling out of control and reminding myself that I have agency over at least something. Mm-hmm. And for me, I always call it like going micro, because I guess I'm not that creative and I'm like, oh, that sounds good. I'm going to go micro. Like when something feels so overwhelming to me, like, how am I going to get through this? Like, how am I going to get through life without my mom, who I thought was going to be the person next to me to be my witness and be a grandmom to my kids and, just cheer me on and, have that amazing relationship with her for decades more. Okay, well, how about how do I get through the next hour? What do I need to do to get myself through the next hour? Or what do I have to do to get through the next week? Like, what are the important things that I have to do? And then what can I do to make it easier on myself? What are the expectations of me in my life? Because I have a lot of roles right now. I'm a parent. I have a partner. I work. I'm a friend. I'm, a woman who should probably somehow try and stay in shape somehow. There's a lot going on. So you can't do it all the time. So when you're feeling really overwhelmed, what are the small things that you can do that can ground yourself again? And everybody has their own thing, like you can't just tell someone, just do yoga, but like, is it a ritual? Like, I really believe in the power of ritual, and ritual sounds like this really big, heady, religious word. But when I say ritual, I mean anything that allows you to put a frame of control around an experience that feels like you do not have a lot of control. And that, for all intents and purposes, let's just say grief, whatever grief means to you, whatever loss of control you have in an area of life that is providing you with feelings of grief and loss. Let's say, how do we create ritual around it that allows us to feel maybe connected with something that we are grieving or someone, but also making us feel a little bit better and
Yeah.
lighter, you know? And so that ritual is to me where it's at all the time.
This is one of my favorite topics too, in the context of connection as well, and just well-being. So I'm smiling right now as you're talking about this. I want to get into the overlap and intersection of grief and friendship with a little bit more specificity. But before we do, I just want to highlight two of the really impactful and really quite practical strategies that you just mentioned. The first of getting micro, right? Focus on what is small, what is here, what is now, what is within my control, what is one thing that I can do to continue being in this moment.
Sometimes it is
even.
one thing.
Yeah. So the micro piece and the value of these rituals, which whatever form they take can provide that sense of stability and feeling grounded. And to your point, also feeling connected and supported. So let's talk a little bit about the friendship of it all. It's interesting because part of why I was so excited to have you on today is because, yes, of course, there is so much overlap and our friends are a unique and important source of support as we are grieving. And we'll talk about how we can grieve friends as well. But on some level, the overlap is also that, as you said before, we don't really talk about grief openly, and we also don't talk about our friendships openly. These are things that when we are struggling with that, we feel like, I don't know where to go or who to turn to, or I shouldn't be talking about that, or there's something wrong with me that I'm finding this so challenging, and we certainly can judge ourselves. And so Two Peas on a Pod is really about the people who shape us and who support us. And I want to get into this in terms of how your friendships have supported you, or when you're just mentioning those rituals that we can do alongside others. What are some of these stories and experiences that you have heard or gone through personally that really illustrate how meaningful that type of connection can be?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. Something that my friends did for me that helped me. I actually remember at my mom's funeral that I was never somebody who had just like the one big group of friends. Like that always looked really fun to me, and I never had it. I was just like I just marched to the beat of my own drummer as a kid. I was a theater kid and I played violin, and like I just had all these like really odd groups of friends. I went to musical theater overnight camp. And so I had like a best friend who was at a different school, and then I did acting, and I had a friend who I did commercial auditions with. And so it wasn't just like when my mom died that it was all my best girlfriends. They all knew each other and they said, let's just support Rebecca. That's not the way it looked. It looked like a lot of kind of disparate people from my life coming together. And I remember, well, I'm from Philadelphia originally. So my mom's funeral and the Shiva, which is the Jewish mourning ritual where you kind of get together for several days and you eat a lot and you remember a lot. All these friends from all these different facets of my life were at my mom's Shiva. And I remember all of them meeting each other. And I vaguely remember, because I was in a bit of a, like a soupy mental state, them connecting with each other. And what I did not realize was that they had all gotten each other's phone numbers because most of them were at a complete loss for what to do for me. And guess what? I don't blame them because I did not know what to do for myself. But what I didn't know is that they got each other's phone numbers and they decided, okay, look, she's in New York. Most of us are in New York. We are going to start an email chain. We're not going to tell her, but we're just going to make sure that one of us takes on a week at a time and checks in on her. And this was not like a big cohesive group of friends that already existed. They met each other. They loved each other because I like to think I have good taste in friends, and I do. And they said, look, here's who's going to take this week, that week. And they planned it from September through December. And each person took a week. And every week, I would get this like random text from, Hadar or Lauren or Alyssa saying like, hey, what's up? Just like I was just thinking about you. Like, do you want to go to a movie or do you have this? Or can I like swing by your apartment? And I remember thinking, like, why is it like, that's so weird? Like, it's like each week, one person is like being so cool to me. It's like one particular person. And most of the time, I actually was not in the mood to get together or even to have a conversation. And I ignored a lot of people. But what I didn't do was forget that they reached out to me. I remembered it and it felt really good in an experience that felt excruciating. And it got to the point where eventually I said yes to something. I was like, you know what? Can we curse on this podcast?
Oh, fuck yeah.
I was like, fuck it, man. Fuck it. I need a fucking life. Like I spent 10, 11 hours a day at a television studio. I did not have much of a life outside that. And I was like, yeah, I want to go to a concert and I don't want anyone to talk to me. And I remember being like, okay, I'll go to this concert, but like, I just don't feel very social. And I remember her saying, like, that's cool. Like, I won't talk to you. And I went to this concert. And I just existed in the world. And I had someone not to be alone with, even though I was kind of alone. I didn't have to feel isolated. And then finally, a couple of them were like, how about we go to brunch? And I was like, fine, I guess I should eat. And that's when it really started cooking with gas. And it turned into, from September to December, something that we ended up calling Brunch Club. Again, not the most exciting name, but sometimes you just need a name for something. And we ended up having brunch once a month somewhere around the city, somewhere that had a lot of alcohol, that had like that Sunday, like endless mimosa situation. And whoever could come came. And it was this open thing where it was like once a month, I had something almost like hearkening back to like that support group for women who lost their moms that I thought was going to be my salvation, but it didn't. But I circled the date, in red multiple times. I was like, I hung my sanity on it all week long, having an awful week, feeling like I'm going to die, feeling like I'm losing my mind, feeling like I don't have this. Well, guess what? Brunch is on Sunday. And I know I'm going to be with friends who care about me. And that saved my sanity. And they did not have to be therapists. A lot of times we didn't talk about my hard things. They were welcome distractions. Or if I really wanted to be quiet, they'd let me be quiet. And I just felt really comforted watching them talking to each other, And sometimes I wanted to ignore. I just wanted to be funny. And they let me lean into that. And sometimes I really needed to lose my shit and talk about what a mess I was and how I was damaged goods for the rest of time. And like, hopefully, clearly I was not. But in moments I felt like that. And they let me do that. And guess what? They realized somehow that they didn't have to say the perfect thing. They just needed to show up for me, and not just show up once, but to continually show up for me. They had to not be put off with the fact that I may have ignored 95% of their texts, but 5% I got back to, because it meant everything to me to know that my friends, a lot of them, and I lost a lot. Not everybody could hang with my hard thing. And I had to really understand eventually that it wasn't all about me, that a lot of it was about them. Everybody has their own comfort level with this stuff, but that it wasn't about providing one invitation saying, if there's anything I can do. It was about providing specific invitations and continuing to provide those invitations and not being put off when they weren't accepted. And that is truly, honestly, what I feel saved me in the end was continuity. And it was amazing.
Well, and I think part of what this story really helps us to understand is the difference between providing our friends space and creating distance. That there was space for you to not reply, but they kept checking in. They weren't distant in that way. There was space for you to say, yes, I will come to this concert, but I don't want to talk. And so you could be together and be close, not have that distance, but there was still space for you to set those boundaries or to kind of communicate what you wanted that to be like, or to not show up to brunch every week. But there wasn't that sense of you are trying to distance yourself from me and my pain. You are willing and able to be here in whatever, with whatever version of me shows up that day. And there was space also to show up as the version of you that is grieving and wants to talk about the hard things, and the version of you that does not. And as you're talking, like, it's hard for me to not go through my own experiences of grief, which in my life thus far has primarily been what has felt like the most profound anticipatory grief, which is also something that I want to talk with you about. And just thinking about that in terms of anticipating losses that are to come, or experiencing the grief now, knowing that this part or phase of my life is marked by anticipatory grief, and grieving what a particular life stage could have been like. I know that there are moments where I want the friend next to me who's going to say, like, tell me about the hardest thing that you're going through right now. And I won't be scared off by the dark and scary parts of your story, of your experience. And I remember a friend say basically that exact thing to me. And that was probably the most supportive thing anyone has ever said, of, it doesn't have to be delivered perfectly. It doesn't have to be pretty. No pain is too painful for me to hear right now. And so sometimes really wanting that, and other times being so fucking frustrated when people are like, oh, tell me about how hard this must be. I'm like, no, I want to talk about,
like Real Housewives.
Precisely. I want to talk about reality TV. I want to talk about that, embarrassing story that happened. I want to talk about I want to talk about bullshit, right? And that is because sometimes, as you said before, we can't always be in the pain, and also because we are human and life is so rich, and we need, part of coping with the grief is being able to experience that richness of life. And so I love this story in terms of the value of showing up consistently, and the difference between space and distance.
It really is like showing up, following up, and following through. I want to actually underscore how awesome it was what you just said, which is that you're like, sometimes I don't want to talk about like my deepest, darkest things. And that should only give people hope who are listening, who want to be good sources of friendship to somebody going through something hard, that you don't always have to be wired like the person who's going to sit down and say, tell me everything. Like, that would be amazing, but we don't actually all have that capacity. And I always say that, well, a lot of us do have that capacity, because it isn't about you. It's just about being a container for somebody. But we don't always have that, because we are rightfully also going through our own things. We might be dealing with our own illnesses and caregiving and burnout and fears and, broken arms, or freaking out over politics, So we don't always have to necessarily be the person that provides that invitation for someone in pain. But we all have our abilities, right? Like, are you so anal that you live and die for spreadsheets? Then guess what? Like, you and I are not the same person, but I could really use you when it comes to when I need somebody to help me get my shit in gear because my grief brain is super foggy. Like, can you help me with a project, right? Can you whip something into shape, or can you take over the logistics for something that feels overwhelming to me? That's real utility as a friend. Are you the person who really just is the party person? Like, are you somebody who maybe you are uncomfortable with hard conversations? And like, that's cool. I wish you weren't, because I promise they're not contagious. But do you really, really have trouble getting there? Okay, fine. Then can you be the person that's like, listen, if you ever need somebody to just go out, be silly, watch the stupid thing, like, let's like put something about Mary on and have some pizza or whatever, I'm your person. And not just say if you ever need it, but like say, hey, I saw this thing is happening. Should I get tickets for this? Like, you can be that person. All of us has our abilities, our natural abilities as friends and as people. And so I always say to people who are like, I don't know how to show up for this person. Like, I don't know. I always say, actually, you do, because we're all good. We are all naturally good at something. Think about what you're naturally good at providing to yourself and to others, and within your bandwidth, right? You don't have to like become someone who knows how to bake a casserole if you literally microwave every single meal. But are you able to take someone's kid out for an ice cream so they can stare at a wall or take a shower? Then maybe do that.
So as you're talking now, first of all, to any of my friends listening, I promise you, I will never be the friend who makes you a casserole, but I will show up in other ways. But you had this great moment before where you were talking about, asking yourself, what is one thing I need right now? And it sounds like the flip side of that is also a really helpful question for us to ask ourselves when we're looking to support a friend. What is one thing I can offer right now? What is one thing I can do right now? And if we can check in with ourselves, come up with an honest answer about something that we have the capacity for, something that feels like it's within our wheelhouse, and something that we can propose with specificity and enact with completion, right? I can say, here is specifically what I can do for you, and I am going to do this from beginning to end. That is very often the most supportive thing that we can do. And the story, again, coming back to the way that your friends showed up for you, not only was there consistency, there was this taking on of responsibility. They didn't ask you, send us a list of all of your friends and who do you want to hear from and who do you want to hear from? That burden and the responsibility of organization wasn't on you either. And so they were able to show up for you and to also offload you in that way. And I think that that's how we can be thinking about this, by doing a lot of that inner work of what do we have the capacity for and how can I get specific at what I'm offering?
Yeah. Because I think it would be really disingenuous to suggest that every person can provide everything for a friend that they want to support. You can't. I mean, everyone has their own shit going on. And I think that that was a mistake that I made, where I ended up being pretty hard on some friends who I felt really weren't showing up for me in ways in which I really, really, really wanted them to. And it hurt so much. And I lost a couple of friends after my mom died. And I think that, in time, it took me a long time to kind of look in the rearview mirror with some perspective, but I realized, I'm like, oh, I get it. Like it wasn't about me. It wasn't that they just decided they didn't like me. They really, really just could not do it. They could not hang with my hard thing. But then other friends, they fell by the wayside, not because they couldn't hang, but because they literally couldn't hang. I'm proud of myself for admitting this at this point, but I had one of my very best friends from college was in her she was third year med school when my mom died, very rudely at a real inopportune time for our friendship, because she wasn't able to show up for me all the time. She had responsibilities, or guess what? She wasn't going to graduate from med school. She wasn't going to do well, but I could only see my own perspective for quite some time. And I was really hard on her. And but thank God, she's still one of my best friends, but we had several years of distance, not animosity, but distance, where I was like, great, thanks a lot. Thanks for nothing, man. My mom, who you loved, who danced at your wedding, died on the Jersey Turnpike. And I really needed you. Where were you? Well, guess what? She really showed up in the ways in which she could. And that was really only through occasional calls and really maybe sometimes physically attending something when her schedule allowed it to. And I really think that that's important to talk about, because I feel like you and I are talking about two different perspectives, right? It's for all intents and purposes, the name would be griever, but then it's the friend, right? It's how do you ask for and get support? How do you provide support? But also within those two roles, how do you ask for and get support, and also realize that people really are, if they care about you, and if you're telling them what they need and they're trying their best to give it to you, and if they fall through short sometimes, it might be because that's within their abilities. It's just, I'm all for ending friendships when something is toxic or dangerous, making you constantly feel bad about yourself. I'm all for distancing yourself from people who are not showing up for you, saying this is not providing me with what I need right now. But I always really do tell people, don't be so fast to cut people out of your life when you're moving through grief. Because just as you're figuring out, you're a grief zygote in this particular loss situation, you're trying to figure out what you look like in this situation. They're also trying to figure out what their role is in your new situation. You're all figuring out together, and it's going to take some time.
And it's an evolving situation, right? I mean, there's the friendships themselves have these ebb and flows, as does grief. And regardless of whether you subscribe to this model of the 5 stages or the pendulum, or it feels entirely chaotic and there's no rhyme or reason. And it's hard to know what stage or phase or place you are in or what timeline you are on even. Things are evolving. And so making impulsive decisions doesn't necessarily always make sense or reflect what we need or reflect ultimately what we can get from each other. And I don't mean that in a transactional way. I mean that in a truly nourishing way. And I appreciate kind of your perspective here that I think is really important for people to take a moment to reflect on, anyone who's listening, because when someone doesn't show up for us in the way that we hope or expect, it is so easy to personalize that and think that that's a reflection of, well, see, they obviously never really cared about me. Or if they did care about me now, then they would show up in this way. Or we cut and run, to come back to your point of, well, okay, I'm just going to end this friendship because I don't need friends like that. And if we can do a little bit of that perspective taking or almost storytelling, we don't even necessarily need to know exactly what the story is, but if we can come up with alternatives, we can create enough space that we can potentially find our way back to each other. So thinking about, well, maybe this person's going through their own struggles that I may or may not know about, or maybe this is about actually not about me, it's about their ability to tolerate distress, that right now it is too difficult for them to feel this. Right. And it's not that they don't care, it's actually that they're so empathic to your situation that being around that without the tools to cope with that or sit with that just feels untenable. So doing a little bit of that storytelling and perspective taking can be helpful. And sometimes it does necessitate a conversation. Thinking about this friend, did you ever have a conversation together about what happened? And was that helpful in finding your way back to each other?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is absolutely correct. And I think that, look, when we are in the darkest depths of grieving, we don't have the wherewithal to be like, well, maybe they're going through their own thing. Like, no, we're just like, Jesus, what is wrong with them? But the truth is, and the reality is that eventually, and it sucks, by the way, it's not there, but the onus really is on us to communicate what is not working for us, what would be so amazing if they could provide it to us, or what we just need, or what we're going through. Again, not fair that the pressure is on like we, the grievers, to be like, this particular week is so hard because this, that, or the other. Like these are like the 17 feelings that I'm struggling with the most. And this is like the stressor that I'm struggling with the most, or the memory, or the looming date that's coming down the pike that I'm fully bracing myself for. Very few of us can really intuit exactly what another person is going through, even a best friend, because we also have our own things going on. It's just the reality that the better we get at telling ourselves that we have every right to stand in our own narratives, and going back to the storytelling, like to tell our stories, to share within our areas of comfort, our comfort zones, what we're going through, what is hard, what feels like it would make something feel a little bit more dealable, and including like, what is someone you're talking to doing that is just not working for you?
Yeah.
Instead of being like, oh, screw them. That is when we kind of help each other to muddle through. And that is when you really do see who is willing to show up for you and who just cannot. And I assure you that when you're moving through something hard, and Dr. Miriam, you know this as well as anybody else, given your own personal experiences, that it feels a hell of a lot better, maybe not happier, but a hell of a lot better, feeling like when you're bearing something really hard, just that it feels a little bit better when you feel like that burden is being divided up and carried among a lot of people's shoulders. Alongside you. Not that they're dealing with something hard too, but that they just know a bit about it. And that is really how we eradicate a stigma. That's how you normalize a conversation. That's how you normalize a topic like grief in casual conversation. And that is the entire mission of Modern Loss.
So we don't talk about grief enough. And there are also some types of grief that we especially don't talk about enough. And I mentioned the experience of anticipatory grief earlier. What do you think is important for people to know about anticipatory grief in terms of how it shows up, what misconceptions may be there? And is there anything unique or different about that? Or as you said, when we first started chatting today, grief is grief is grief?
Yeah, I think anticipatory grief, I think grief is grief is grief. I think that the term anticipatory grief is not understood and legitimized and respected enough by people. And I think we need to talk about it more because I think that if we did legitimize and respect it, then we might get to a point where we're supporting ourselves better when we're going through it. So of course, like people, just let's talk about like the obvious thing, right? Let's say we're caretaking somebody or we have somebody we really care about who has a long illness and maybe it's a terminal illness. There's so much uncertainty associated with stages of anticipatory grief and it can be really excruciating. Talking even about like, somebody who has a parent with Alzheimer's and they're changing before your eyes and you're losing the person who is right in front of you. They're still there, but they're no longer that person personality wise. You have to get used to a new version of them. That is real grief. And I think that people like telling themselves, and I know this for a fact because I have a lot of people in my life who are dealing with anticipatory loss. They say, when the thing happens, I really need to set myself up so that I'm like with the right therapist or getting the right support, or I'm really going to need a lot of support when the thing happens, the thing in many cases being when there's death. And I always say to them, dude, like your mom has FTD, you're, getting calls from a police department that she just robbed a CVS because she thought that everything she bought was only worth $20. Like that's a lot to deal with. That's grief. I think that you should probably get the support you need right now, because this is grief. Right now, you're in it. You're dealing with a lot of burnout, a lot of worry. You're probably dealing with a lot of like role changing. You're probably giving up something in your life that you thought you might have, but you're giving it up because you're caretaking somebody. Like that's grief. That's caretaking grief. That's worthy of nourishment and of acknowledgement and of help. And so, yeah, when it comes to anticipatory grief, like we don't talk enough about it because we are told like, oh, you're so strong. You have this. Okay, well, maybe you do, but like you don't have to look graceful during it. And you're also allowed to feel like you don't have it. And no one has it alone. So please get help. Please connect with others. There are so many incredible conversations around anticipatory loss and caregiving, and you just need to latch on to one of them and feel like you're a part of it. Even if you never speak up verbally or in an online forum, you just need to know that you're not alone in something like this. And frankly, I encourage you to find the right therapeutic supports. Like you deserve to have a sounding board that doesn't have any biases, that isn't a family member, that isn't a friend, that is just there for you to give you different ideas for coping mechanisms that you can try and maybe won't work, but then give you ideas for others and help you think about what feels hard in the moment and then work through it together. You deserve that now.
Thank you for that, both on behalf of everyone listening and personally speaking as well. I think that that's a really important message. And the role that connection plays in navigating grief and sitting with it and processing it is huge and can't be overstated. And I'm also kind of thinking a lot about that piece that you said of how we can get so caught up in preventative mode, right? Or trying to protect our future self of, okay, let me set things up because, and worrying functions this way too. Let me set things up. Let me think about things because then it won't hurt as much later or it won't be as complicated later.
Right.
And there's a bit of truth to that. And of course, worrying about the future or thinking about the stresses that are to come doesn't necessarily make it any less stressful. And to your point, planning so much ahead for the grief that is to come doesn't necessarily always allow us to process the grief that we're feeling now. So there's a lot of food for thought in what you've just shared.
If I could leave with one statement, it's that grief is alive and ever shifting.
Yes.
Because you are alive. Your loss is alive because you're alive and you're going to move through different feelings and things that feel easier and things that feel harder and different life stages. And you're hopefully going to age and you're going to regard your loss in different ways. And sometimes it will feel more manageable and more like, oh, like that feels like I can connect with it in a way that isn't excruciating. And then sometimes suddenly it will bite you in the ass and you'll feel like a grief zygote again. And you'll wonder why it feels so hard. And like, I wish I could just have everybody believe that as long as you're not hurting yourself or anybody else, then all of this is normal.
Yeah.
You know, unless you're in a moment and in a stage where you are so incapable of your day-to-day functions, right? Like you're so incapable of getting up and going to work, or like having any sort of social life, or completing your responsibilities in parenting at work, what have you, then you really might need some additional support. And that's okay too. Like you deserve it. But the wide majority of people who will grieve, I want to say, according to, everything I've read, like about 90% of people will move through this in a really normative way,
Mm-hmm.
but no one does it alone. And it looks different for everybody. And it's individualized, but it does not have to be isolating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's up to us. Like that's up to us as a society.
Yes.
Do we want to isolate people? Do we really want that in 2026? Is that what's good for us?
There's a resounding no. That's not what we want right now. Here's the last question I want to ask you. So one of the things that we like to do before we're ending off office hours is to ask our guests for their next connection step. So for people who are tuning in today, who are giving that, emphatic no, that's not what we want to do. We don't want to move through grief alone. We want to better support our friends. We want to shift the conversation about grief. What is one action you would recommend, one connection step you would recommend people take after they've listened to today's conversation that they go out and do in their friendships, in their relationships, to both strengthen those connections and to shift the way that we are responding to grief and supporting each other through it?
I think that if you're the griever, again, just like the word that we're ascribing to a very vast experience, a next step that I would encourage you to do is just lean into the fear that if you put yourself out there in some way, that you won't feel seen and heard by somebody who wants to see and hear you. I get it. I get the fear because a lot of people suck at this, but you're also a smart person, dear listener. You know who you have in your life, who you can try to talk to in a way that's really earnest and open within whatever you're willing to share. Just dip your toe in the water. Just try with one person who feels like a safe person to share what is feeling like the hardest thing ever right now. And could we just maybe try and talk about it? Just try with one person. And you might be, and I want to even say, hopefully, probably will be pleasantly surprised by the reaction you get. And also that might encourage you to start having more open and daring, even one-on-one conversations with other people who aren't your best friends. Because some of my best friends that I have in life right now are my grief friends. They're the people who have gone through the shit. They're not all people with dead parents. They're people with whom I have discovered I have a shorthand, in a language shorthand, because we're willing to cut through the fluff and get right to a real conversation. And it is so lovely and energizing to be able to have real conversations. It will encourage you to have more of those types of exchanges if you just try with someone who feels trusted first. I really believe that your capacity for building community after a hard thing is maybe even stronger than it was beforehand. Because in my experience, and with my years of, shepherding this modern loss global community connection, real community is not built when like things are fine and dandy. Maybe when you're like drunk in college, it's amazing. But like, yeah, sure. But like in real life, real community and connections are built when you're really going through the crucible of it, when you're really in the toughness. That's when the real connections happen.
And I appreciate you sharing this paradox of grief, because grief on the one hand can be so very isolating. And I remember I hosted a workshop for Modern Loss many years ago on the loneliness of loss. And yet there is this other side where it's not only can we show up, learn to better show up for the people in our lives, it's those hard moments in life are also an opportunity to deepen our connections, to make new ones, and to really find and strengthen that community. So thank you for pointing that out. Rebecca, this has been an amazing conversation, so meaningful. I'm going to be thinking about this a lot. If people are listening today and they would like to learn more about you, about the modern loss community, if they're ready maybe to dip their other toe in the water, if they're ready to, say goodbye to the fluff and want to give fewer fucks, frankly, in terms of the way that they are trying to wrap their grief up in a neat little bow, where can they go to learn more about modern loss and the important work that you are doing?
Modern Loss is on a lot of different platforms. There is an online magazine, modernloss.com. I never write for it. It's thousands and thousands of amazing personal narratives that are narrowly focused around one aspect of the grief and loss experience. And we could be talking about sex or finance or identity or education. We're trying to show that the long arc of loss is everything. It's like a 365-degree experience. Also, primarily, what I really love is come on into the Substack. It's the Modern Loss Substack. It's one of their top health and wellness publications. I'm really proud of it. That's where I have my voice right now. That's where I will do in-depth interviews with people who are really doing some amazing work in topics that we need to learn more about. Come to the Modern Loss Substack, because I really love that little corner of the internet. And it's a really wonderful place. And then separately, I've written 2 books. My second one I'm particularly proud of. It's called The Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience. It's in a 3rd printing, and I wrote it in the deepest, darkest depths of COVID. So I really am proud that it actually makes sense. And I think that this is a book that I truly, it's not a marketing line. I really wish that someone had given it to me, because I wrote it with 3 goals in mind. I wanted to write something that would help people to stay connected to their loss, like their person, their thing, their pet, the thing that they're grieving. I wanted to write something that would help people stay connected to themselves through like how to take care of their bodies and their minds and their creativity, their sleep, their health, etc. And then how to stay connected to the world around them, their friendships, their intimate relationships, their work lives. And I kind of realized for myself, like, oh, I get it. Like those are the 3 goals in moving through loss. Just trying to figure out different tools that you have to help yourself in those 3 areas. So yeah. I'm really proud of that one.
Thank you for sharing all those resources, all of your wisdom. And also, you're very funny. And I love, love, love how you bring that to this very serious topic and help to bring a little bit more nuance to how we're speaking about it and all of the different feelings that this can evoke.
You just gotta laugh. You gotta laugh in loss. What is comedy? Comedy is laughing at the ludicrous, painful, crazy aspects of life. So what is loss? What is grief? What is humor in grief, right? It's laughing at the ludicrous, absolutely batshit crazy things that will happen when you are grieving. And it is a universal thing. You cannot rend your clothes all day long. And it is an amazing connector and community builder when you're able to bond with somebody over the crazy shit. That is really where your friendships can deepen.
Okay, for a conversation that can quite obviously lean pretty heavy, I always leave my conversations with Rebecca feeling uplifted, and that one was no exception. Yeah, I have to say, I appreciate her wit and her candor, and I am a fan of anyone who is keen to cut through bullshit and all the platitudes that we have become far too tolerant of and accepting of. But I also really find it comforting how she's able to speak to a human experience, a shared experience, in a way that inherently helps us to feel less alone. Like we spoke about, we don't talk about grief openly, and we don't talk about our friendships openly. And so I'm so glad that we were able to come together to have this conversation. And part of what today's conversation certainly helped me to do is it helped me to think a little differently about grief. Yes, by challenging some of the myths that we hold about what grief feels like, what it sounds like, but also about the trajectory that it necessarily follows. So this whole idea of a dual process model is something that was new to me, especially in comparison with the stages model that so many of us have heard of. Our conversation today, though, also helped me to rethink how we show up for others. And this was really meaningful because there's obviously so much alignment in terms of the work that Rebecca does in the world of grief and the space that I work in terms of connection and support. So a few strategies that I want to just highlight that certainly stood out to me in my conversation today with Rebecca. The first is we really want to propose with specificity. When we're looking to support someone in a moment of grief or in a period of overwhelm, or in a moment of crisis, so often we turn to those platitudes and we say things like, let me know if there's anything I can do. But the truth is, when we propose with specificity, when we say, here's what I can do, we remove the burden of care. We make it easier for somebody to take us up on our offers of support. And also, we remove the cognitive load of having to think about what might be helpful in that situation. So propose a specificity and also lean on your strengths as an individual, as a friend. So when you're proposing ways that you can help, it helps to give examples. And so thinking about supporting a friend, are you offering to cook a homemade meal? Are you the one who's going to set up and coordinate a meal train online? Or are you sending an Uber Eats gift card? All of that is equally valuable. So think about the capacity that you have and how you can show up. And also keep showing up. That certainly stood out from my conversation today with Rebecca, that it might take a while for people to feel comfortable taking you up on your offers. And so keep extending those invitations and know that people will come to you on their own time when they are ready. The last piece that I want us to be thinking about is how it helps to get micro, to get small. And this counts not only for how we support our friends, but also how we can support ourselves. If you are someone who is in a moment of grief, if you are surfing the wave of grief, get micro. What's small? What's one thing that is within my control? One thing that I can do right here, right now, that will help me move from this moment to the next. Grief is inherently a profoundly individual experience, but that doesn't mean it has to be isolating. Yes, no one will ever be able to experience your grief, not the way that you probably want them to. They're just not capable. And there's something that does feel quite lonely about that. But here is your friendly reminder. The loneliest of life experiences can also be the ones that are the most unifying, that have the potential to help us feel so connected. Grief itself is this deeply personal experience and a universal experience. And throughout today's conversation, I have this mental imagery of surfing a wave. And that's probably not all that surprising because we talk about grief in this way, about how important it is to find ways to surf the waves that inevitably show up and frankly, keep showing up throughout our lives, sometimes at a different rhythm or a different cadence, sometimes at completely unexpected moments. But here's the thing. If we're lucky, if we turn towards others, we can learn to surf the waves alongside a few trusted people who are there next to us. Maybe we're not surfing the same wave. Maybe they're not even surfing at all yet. Maybe they are cheering us on from shore. Maybe they've already surfed a few waves of their own and they're on shore waiting for us to paddle back in and to wrap a towel around us afterwards and to give us that comforting hug. Yes, there's loneliness and grief and loss. Of course, we know that that's true. But my big takeaway from our conversation today is that there is also a whole lot of life to live in it and through it, and connection to be found. And that, my friends, was Office Hours. I am so glad, as always, that we got to share this time together, and I hope that it will inspire you to invest in your friendships and the people who matter most. I will be right back here with you next week for another episode of Two Peas on a Pod with some favorite familiar friends. And in the meantime, let's make sure that we stay connected. So follow the show on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me at The Two Peas on a Pod and at Miriam Kermeyer across social channels. And of course, make sure that you share today's episode with a friend or maybe somebody you know who has loved and lost. Until our next catch up, take care of yourself and the people in your pod. And I will see you back here next week. Two Peas on a Pod is hosted by Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Executive produced by Zoe Travis, Matthew Hoffman, Katya Kaminsky, and Dr. Miriam Kermeyer. Produced and edited by Podcast Nation. Producers, Madison Britt and Alicia Paneer. Audio engineer, Miles Carter. Original music by Sarah Walk. Created by Zoe Travis and Matthew Hoffman. Two Peas on a Pod is recorded in Montreal and Los Angeles.